Hello, everybody. Welcome to our monthly PCA Live. We're going to focus a lot on state legislatures convening, some of the things that we anticipate with the state legislative forecast, but also a little bit about the federal developments. That's why I'm on to mention a few of those, and then I'll turn it over to Glenn to give a state forecast, and we'll go back and forth about that. And see kind of where things are going to head into 2022. We did a release yesterday about a development in the Build Back Better framework in the House of Representatives, and did a release yesterday and something that was pushed forth by the president, by President Biden. You will recall in the House Ways and Means Committee a couple months ago, there was the significant tobacco tax parity provisions, tobacco tax equity provisions that were included in that House Ways and Means draft. That was removed from the House of Representatives draft and what the president is pushing forth in the agenda. We have sent 25,000 comments from you all, our retail members, consumers, manufacturers, as well as our allies in other associations. We've done 100 meetings on this this year alone. It's been something that we opposed early on in February and March when it was introduced as a standalone bill. And I think the messaging really resonated towards the end, the past 2 or 3 weeks, really looking at the migration and immigration issues, the policy summit. You had a lot of outreach by both the Honduran and Dominican governments and some high up elected or high up officials there coming out against this tax in the United States and how detrimental it would be, not only here in the United States, but elsewhere in terms of small business, economics, and employment. I want to emphasize, though, that this is not final. This is still an active debate. We're not, the banner did not read victory. This is not a outright victory. This is a significant step. It's a positive step, but there still are parts of the process, and it's being negotiated. And if you read the alert, we emphasize that this campaign is not over. We adjusted our messaging. And if you read the letter that is sent as part of our one-click system to elected officials, it acknowledges that this was removed, and we appreciate and thank Congress for removing that. But we emphasize this cannot be brought back. And there are parts of the process. There will be something called a manager's amendment where the bill itself will be refined, and some other parts of this process where we need to ensure that this remains taken out. And you better believe that the anti-tobacco groups that initiated this to begin with are also circling the wagons and trying to get their messaging in and doing meetings. So next week we have a dozen additional meetings at the federal level to ensure that this doesn't come back. And our partners with Cigar Rights of America, who we've been working very closely on this with, they are active on this as well, and other associations and partners are across the different categories. So we'll continue to update folks on that happens. Again, very positive development. It is a sigh of relief not to be in the direct crosshairs at this moment, but this is not a final victory on this issue in itself for this year. But I will stop on the federal stuff and turn it over to my colleague, Glenn, to give us some state updates, and we'll converse a little bit about the state forecast.
Well, thanks, Josh. Right now, as anybody that's observing the political world, everything's about the crystal ball. What's going to happen in Congress? What's going to happen with the federal budget? What's going to happen in the states? And at this juncture, all we have is a crystal ball for the states. But we're not too far from the beginning of the 2022 state legislative season. And that's what it is. It's a season. In January, over half of the country's state capitals will kick back into gear. Legislation will be filed, and we're going to have to be as diligent as absolutely ever at watching out for the good and the bad. But right now, we have this somewhat of a crystal ball because of what's called pre-filing, and legislatures are now taking bills to be pre-filed. So it's kind of a window into what to anticipate. And already out of the chute, as anticipated, for the let's see, probably sixth or seventh time, but one of these days it's going to be more serious than not. The bill has been pre filed in Florida to allow local governments to regulate smoking on beaches and in parks and really the outdoors as a whole, depending on how wide of a net they want to cast. There's a hearing next week actually on that bill. Um, it's just a very preliminary step. It's assignment to committee, but PCA will be having a notice on that at cigaraction.org, where we encourage now all of our cigar advocates, all of our cigar voters, consumers, retailers alike, joining forces with our manufacturing community to send a message to the Florida legislature that this is not acceptable. Florida doesn't need a quilt work of different rules and regulations that differ from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. It simply doesn't work. It hasn't worked anywhere that it's been tried. But that's a window into what we can anticipate. And on that front, we've got to be, speaking of local authority, I think what happened in 21 is a direct window into what we can anticipate in 22. There's not a lot of imagination, if you will, in the tobacco control agenda, but they are consistent and they are diligent and they consistently come at it and just pound, pound, pound until they try to eventually get their way. That's where we have to be equally as diligent. So I think, as far as the political crystal ball in the state capitals are concerned, we can anticipate legislation being filed in Tennessee, Kentucky, Oregon, and Missouri, if not a few other states like New Mexico, that allow for local authority, local control, local taxation power over tobacco products. That occurred in 21. That those bills died in each of those respective states, but I think we can completely anticipate them coming back at it again. Likewise, on the tax front, I think we can anticipate the reintroduction of tax increase measures in Maine, and we still have this carryover, lingering effect of a tax increase bill filed in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And like always, on the tax front, we have to keep a diligent eye out on Illinois. On a preliminary net cast, that's where I would put the highest levels of threat, if you will, for tax increase bills. On the tax cap front, obviously a measure that's very beneficial to the industry, and we want to commend the brethren out in the state of Michigan for successfully getting this tax cap through the Senate, as was announced yesterday. We want to commend them, their leadership, their advocates for that effort, and we look forward to reinforcing that message. Where you can go to cigaraction.org and send a direct message to your Michigan legislator supporting that bill, and we certainly hope the governor supports it as well. With that, in addition to keeping an eye out on Michigan, tax cap bills are going to be alive in New York, New Jersey, probably Illinois, and possibly also Nebraska. Uh, they've been diligently laying groundwork out there in Nebraska, should it be needed. And I've got to say this just as a sidebar cigar tourism commentary. You never would have thought it, but Omaha, Nebraska is a bona fide cigar culture. Anybody in the country that wants to spend a long weekend doing nothing but touring great cigar shops and lounges and cigar bars, go to Omaha, Nebraska. And those retailers have diligently been laying the groundwork out there for a tax cap measure if it's needed. And we need to support those types of efforts like have been led by the retail community in New York, New Jersey, Michigan, Illinois, and Nebraska. Off the top of our head, those are the ones we can anticipate. In addition to Florida, I think we have to keep an eye out on the bill in Pennsylvania to try to once again close the exemptions for smoking. Whether or not it goes anywhere, put that out of your mind. the bill's there, and if the bill's there, it's alive, and it needs to be paid attention to, because you never know what day it's going to be more serious than not. So we have to be prepared accordingly, and I think we can anticipate that. And there's also early chatter right now about attacking smoking in gaming facilities, specifically in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, in Atlantic City, and also in Iowa. Uh, Smoking in gaming facilities consistently comes up, but because of the use, and I use that term very specifically, because of the use of the pandemic to attack smoking in facilities like casinos, like cigar shops and lounges and cigar bars. There's been a lot of recent chatter online about attacking smoking and being allowed in Atlantic City casinos. And I think we've got to keep an eye on that. And there's also been equal chatter on that front in Pennsylvania.
But there's
Um,
also, and Glenn, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think going into the forecast also that, in these age verified locations like cigar bars and in casinos, there is an impetus in some of these states, not only, in certain ones to close those exemptions, but also to allow for those age verified locations where you can enjoy a cigar with an adult beverage, the reintroduction of those. Can you take a moment to talk a little bit about the positive legislation where we're not on, as an industry, we're not on the defensive?
well, it's an interesting point because age verified, but and class facilities and businesses that are classified as adult only is an interesting way for us to get what we want, allowing adults to enjoy a premium handmade cigar and a cocktail in a bar, in a casino, in adult verified facilities. Excuse me. And for example, that's one of the reasons it's been so beneficial for the cigar bar community in the state of Georgia, because adult only is specifically in the statute there. So having that type of an exemption for adult only classified facilities is a marvelous way to do an end run around that type of legislation. And I probably shouldn't use the term end run, but everybody else is trying to figure out, all right, how can I get my piece of the puzzle? And that's one way for the cigar industry to get theirs. Um, I am concerned about the growth of bills simply because it's only two states right now, but it has a way of spreading. Is legislation that would allow employers to discriminate based upon nicotine testing as a condition of employment. That type of legislation has been introduced in the past in Indiana and Kentucky. It died in both places. In Indiana, it's actually called the Smokers' Bill of Rights. But I think that type of legislation is going to come back. And along those lines, I've got to come back to, I will call this Josh Habersky's favorite bill of 21. As you well remember, and you were on the front lines of attacking this legislation, is the legislation that would mandate that cigar shops or anywhere that sells tobacco, any place that sells tobacco, to be required to sell smoking cessation products. Well, that same bill was introduced where the Commonwealth of Massachusetts this week in a pre-filed measure. Came, you and I were chatting on your way back from TAA. There must have been 15 bills filed in Massachusetts yesterday. Some of them were plastic bags that get caught up in this type of debate. A lot of them about smoking in multifamily housing. A lot of them about smoking in public housing. But then there it was, require any place that sells tobacco to sell smoking cessation products. Well, let's just think about that for a second. It was just in the last 6 months that Shantex was forced to be taken off the market because as a smoking cessation product, what? It was determined to cause cancer. You can't make this stuff up. A smoking cessation product has to be taken off the shelf because it is now proven to cause cancer. I think I can't wait to send releases about that to Massachusetts. Uh, but it just came up this week, and it gives you an idea why you have to keep an eye on this stuff.
Yeah, and that was something that originally came up in New Jersey, and Gary Colsair, who I was with at TAA, and we talked extensively about it. We have a blueprint to fight this. So I think that it's going to be important to educate lawmakers in Massachusetts about that. But you do see these things reoccurring. That is a new tool, and kind of a crazy one in the playbook of the public health groups or the anti-tobacco groups. So, that's something that we'll keep our eyes appealed to. I do want to mention, Glenn, I know that you've been working on a project for our magazine about getting a list of state association contacts. If somebody is a PCA member watching, what would you tell them in terms of getting involved with the state association and in the advocacy front specifically? Can they contact you? Or are you happy to facilitate introductions with groups or help start state associations where they don't exist?
Absolutely. And in the next PCA magazine, we are going to have a directory of the leadership of each state association that now is in existence. And right now, 25 out of 50 states have an association. 25 out of 50, different levels of organization, different levels of engagement, but exist as a structure that help us reinforce our political network throughout the country. In addition to that, we're going to be working on new state association formation in Kentucky, Louisiana, Indiana, Wyoming, just to name a few. And those discussions began actually during the course of the last trade show. So really, anybody that's listening that wants to start one or become more engaged in your respective state association, write me at Glenn, GLYNN, at premiumcigars.org, or reach out to Josh or I on staff, and we would be glad to put the wheels in motion. We're going to be having some increased dialogue with states collectively, where states can learn from each other, learn from examples of where legislation has and has not worked in other states. And that type of information exchange is just absolutely critical to our overall political success. You never know when a bill or a strategy has worked in Maryland that could help out in Louisiana or Arkansas, where an approach in defeating a bill in Oregon helps defeat a bill in Maine. You just never know. And that's the reason we're going to bridge this gap in the coming year. Real quick on the legislative front, there's some positive things that are going to be hopefully resurrecting themselves. One of them definitively is, and that's the cigar bar bill in the state of New York. They've got a strong patron of that legislation, a growing bipartisan coalition to support that bill. Likewise with the New York tax cap, but legislation that would allow an existing cigar shop to have an on-premise license. And they're doing a really creative approach to marry up a coalition of distilleries, wineries, and breweries that exist around cigar shops as a way to showcase local products. And I think that's an incredibly creative way to go about coalition building. And hopefully, cigar bar bills will be reintroduced in Montana and North Dakota. That comes on the heels of some great efforts at the metropolitan level to get cigar bar statutes enacted, like what happened in Augusta, Georgia. I think anytime we can hold those examples up, even ones that failed this past year, they can come back. They will come back, like in Louisville, Kentucky. Just the very fact, Greg Zimmerman and I have had this discussion numerous times. There's some victory in just having legislation and ordinances like that introduced. Who would have thought in the wake of all these smoking bans growing across the country, especially during the 90s and early 2000s, that now places are introducing bills to allow for cigar bars, cigar-only facilities, cigar-only businesses. And I think that's a testament to where this industry has been messaging more properly about what it really means from a public health perspective and from a small business development perspective.
Absolutely. Now, Glenn, can you walk us through, let's say an issue pops up, one of our members or even a consumer sees something in the news and they're like, what's PCA doing about this? It is an issue, like, let's say, for instance, a tobacco tax at the state level. What does PCA do? Walk us through kind of the steps of advocacy and where we can be of assistance to for, let's say, a state association or a collection of retailers in a state to fight back against something like the grassroots alert, communication with staff. things like that. Walk us through kind of a campaign.
Well, let's say that a tax increase bill. Let me give you a good example. Last year in Maine, a tax increase bill was introduced. Um, the state retailers came together. They reached out to their respective state legislators. They started a calling campaign to those state legislators. They specifically reached out and communicated with key members of the budget, finance tax committees. But collectively, we have this real time tracking ability through cigaraction.org. We get notices, you and I get notices, we get hundreds of them a week, especially when state legislatures are in session. First of all, we will reach out to the retail community if there's something truly threatening to the premium cigar sector in a given state. We will help bridge the retailers with their respective state legislatures that represent those shops, specifically those shops, and those that are in leadership and those that are on the relevant committees addressing a given bill. So we'll walk a retailer or a collection of retailers through that process. Secondly, we'll help build a grassroots messaging. We'll handle all that 100% for the retail community. We'll Our staff will write out the petition. We will link that to every single member of a state legislature. All the consumer has to do in a given state is put in their name and zip code, and we message the rest. The system takes care of that. As you mentioned, on the federal level, 10, 20,000 messages going to Congress. We can do the same thing at the state level for good bills and bad. So linking retail shops with their specific members of the legislature, linking retail shops with the leadership and membership of the specific committees where a bill was going to be channeled to. We will write testimony for you to deliver to a given legislative body. What Marvin Holthauser did last year, delivering, as he put it, we threw him into the lion's den. We send Marvin to Tallahassee to give a testimony against the legislation that would allow local control of smoking ordinances. God, I can't think of the number of scripts we've helped construct over the last number of years, but we will help package those messages for you to deliver yourself to a committee, for your employees to deliver to committees, and for mass petitions for the cigar public, to reach out to their specific members or to legislatures as a whole.
And it's important, a lot of these deliverables that we produce are in two key buckets, the policy and the technology. I think that really we work hard on our side to develop advocacy communications, a variety of different mechanisms to facilitate for our membership and connected entities, connected people to communicate with government. And so that might be social media, that might be letters on behalf of the association where Scott Pierce, our executive director, or Greg Zimmerman, our president, it comes from them on our letterhead, but then having talking points for personal interactions, for conducting a meeting. The communications and policy. On the technology side, we have the databases, the tracking tools that Glenn referenced, but also the ability to connect where it's that ease campaign. The tool is called One Click Politics, where you're able to, in 30 seconds, send a message to an elected official's office. And we can do that at the state, the federal, and we also can do some custom targets. And one of the things that we're going to work on between now and the end of the year, our other member of the government affairs team, Ryan Parada, is going to do a video explaining how Cigar Action works from the end user, and I will provide some commentary what we see on the back end. One of the things that I mentioned in a presentation recently, all that data comes into PCA, and I can walk into a congressional meeting, Glenn can walk into a state legislative meeting and say 300 consumers, 30 retailers reached out to you, member of Congress X, Y, and Z. This is why you need to support or oppose this bill. And having those contacts, we also will facilitate what's called grass tops, where we'll provide contact information for a chief of staff, legislative director, legislative assistant for one of our members to directly reach out on something. And that's what we help facilitate in the federal campaign recently on the tobacco taxes, and then also work with the state associations. I want to give kudos to the 15 states that joined PCA in writing letters to specific congressional members about the tobacco tax equity issues.
Well, and all of that is an analogy to what could happen in any state capital. And I'll give you another grand example that's been taken to a great level of both sophistication and consistency is having a Capitol Hill Day. A Capitol Hill Day for all of your state retailers to collectively go to your state capital. If for no other reason, even if there's not a bill to be considered, to make sure they know you, to make sure they know who you are, to make sure they know who you represent, to let them know that we're not a threat to public health, to let them know that that you have a constituency as a cigar shop. And the retailers in Wisconsin have done that consistently. And again, there's very few bills that have popped up in the state of Wisconsin, but they're still going, they're still there to make their presence felt. They're doing the same thing in Albany. They're doing the same thing in North Carolina by going to Raleigh. They're doing the same thing in Georgia by going to Atlanta. They're doing the same thing in Massachusetts by going to Boston.
And if you're not able to do that, or you don't have the resources, or that you're in a state where a state association isn't available or currently formed, I would recommend inviting people to an open house at one of your shops or your lounges, getting elected officials. If you're interested in doing that, we can provide the contact information, a sample invite for things like that. So, logistically, if there is a will, there's a way. If you want to do a lobby day, one of us will provide a training on how to do that, the communications that are necessary. If you want to host someone at your shop, elected official, we'll work to do that. And, depending on the level of priority, we may be able to even join you in that meeting. We are doing a lot of virtual meetings at the federal level still to this day. And it's always great when we are able to bring a member or state association leadership to the table to tell their story. I emphasize that we tee up legislation, we monitor everything, but if we're going to be successful, it's going to require our robust membership really activating and building these coalitions of allies. And I think that's what you saw in this most recent federal campaign, is that a lot of people were reaching out, a lot of people were activating, and we were pulling different levels and different arguments, different talking points, and different levels of communication.
I think another thing we want to put out there as a strategy today, and that we'll follow up on with the states, is a lot of states have effectively created cigar caucuses within their state legislatures. That's been a very effective tool in Pennsylvania. It's been an effective tool in New Hampshire and Connecticut. It's been an effective tool in Virginia, where it doesn't matter how small or how large the group is. If it's 3 legislators that enjoy a cigar together, get them together. Let them operate as a core base of support for you. 5 legislators that enjoy cigars together can be a great force on legislation. And in states like Pennsylvania, they have a much larger caucus, or the cigar group that likes to convene together in Virginia while they're in session. These are sizable groups that can help push an agenda, stall an agenda, create an agenda in support of these shops. So I think that's another tool to be thinking about as we head into this state legislative season.
Absolutely. And one of the things that we were talking about, we were preparing for another presentation, and I thought was an important fact, and I'd like to keep this record, and it will be a challenge next year in 2022, is that there were no successful legislative tax increases that passed in 2021 so far. I think that is an important metric, a testament to the work of the associations in this space and our allies. And Glenn, my hypothesis, and I know part of this is pontificating and providing a little bit of a forecast, is that especially if the federal tax increase is in fact defeated or pulled out, there's going to be more of an impetus in the states to look at these things to raise revenue. And without some of the money from the COVID relief packages, these states are going to be seeking additional revenue streams, and that will be more of a challenge. That this was really positive in the states. There weren't any thus far, and again, we still have about 2 months left, but thus far there were no successful legislative, things that passed for taxes at the state level. But would you agree with me that it would be more of a challenge next year?
I think it could be. And I think it's really regionally driven as well. I think, and again, this is all political crystal ball stuff. So if I'm wrong, don't hold me to it in January. But right now, I think you could see a stable tax environment in the South. I think from Texas to Virginia, there's little or less likelihood of tax increase measures in the South. I think that we've got to keep an eye out on the West Coast, and I think we've got to keep an eye out on all the states that span the belt from from Minnesota to Maine. That whole crest, Minnesota to Maine, you got to keep a close eye out on every single state in that belt of the country for tax increase measures. That's true historically, and not just during these awkward economic times. So, with that, I think that's where we'll place a lot of our attention.
Absolutely. And I know that you referenced the TAA, which I attended this past week. I just want to say thank you to their entire team: Joe, Stephanie, Jennifer, Julie, Steve. I mean, the executive team and executive director. It was an incredible event. I had the opportunity to have a lot of personal one-on-one conversations with manufacturers as well as retailers, as well as Greg Zimmerman, our president, and Scott Pierce, our executive director. They afforded us the opportunity to provide a legislative update. A lot of great questions and comments from the audience, and things that we'll be following up on. I mentioned, we're going to do a tutorial on kind of the grassroots tool itself. The other thing that we referenced as a new deliverable for us is this contact database for state associations. And a third one, which we've done and shared kind of, behind the scenes, but we're going to make this public going into next year, a resource database of sample legislation for the states. I know that you worked on this year really with the impetus with the New York State Association, putting together an incredible packet of information on tax caps. There was discussion with some of the folks at TAA in other states about leveraging that and utilizing it. So we're going to make sure in our policy center and Cigar Action, we'll get some of those new tools out there. But it's always great to interact with our membership. If we don't see you at an in-person event, feel free. I know Aaron in the comments gave our email addresses. Reach out or give us a call. And Glenn, I know that in a short bit you will be at our friends at Cigar Aficionado, their big smoke in Las Vegas, and I'm sure consumers and retailers and manufacturers can look forward to having a cigar with you and catching up on the latest state and federal stuff that's going on in the cigar world.
Josh, if you want to find me, you specifically, if you want to find me next Friday and Saturday, I will be at Casa Fuente in Las Vegas, Nevada. And anybody else, Jay Davis might be listening. He's always showing up. But yeah, Cigar Aficionado Big Smoke is in Las Vegas next weekend. I wish I was going to be down there this weekend in Florida, but Big Smoke Florida is going on this weekend. We hope everybody has a wonderful time at Big Smoke Meets Whiskey Fest, and I can't wait to hear how that went off, where they're blending the spirits industry with premium handmade cigars at the Hard Rock in I think it's Hollywood, Florida, right there outside of Fort Lauderdale. So we hope our friends at Cigar Aficionado have a successful event this weekend, and we'll see them in in Vegas next weekend. And again, if you want to find me on next Saturday, pretty much all day long before Big Smoke, find me at Casa Fuente.
That's great. Well, we appreciate you headed out that way, and having good conversations with everybody about what the latest developments are going on.
Wait a minute, I gotta say this. How many times in your life can you say you smoked in a mall? Come smoke with us in a mall. I just had to get that out. It's the ultimate in freedom. It's like welcome back to America. Anyway, sorry. Keep going.
No, absolutely. And any final thoughts on the state forecast, or any pieces of advice for the listeners today?
Well, we need to broaden our base. I could go throughout this country, and this is not a editorial commentary; it's a statement of fact. You and I have talked about this before. This industry is still very much in its political infancy. We're still growing. We're still getting more sophisticated than one year after the next. A decade at this is not a long time to build a national political network of consumers, retailers, and manufacturers. So, based upon that, every retailer in America needs to come together with their state association. If there isn't one, we'll work with you. Like I said, we're going to be working with the retailers in Kentucky, Louisiana, Indiana, Wyoming in the coming months to get those shored up going into the 22 legislative season. If you're a retailer in Texas and you're not involved, they've got a great group to get involved with that has an established network in the Texas legislature. Likewise in Georgia, likewise in Virginia. But here's the commentary that we need to be painfully honest with ourselves about. There's not enough of it. And there's only a handful of retailers in virtually every given state that is carrying the political water, either financially or politically, for the whole industry in that state. Every retailer needs to be involved. Every retailer needs to join PCA. Every retailer needs to come together with their state association. We're going to be working more diligently to uh, bridge that distance between PCA and the state associations in the coming year. But it requires a level of engagement. I'll never forget, and I just never want to hear this story again. I was talking about a tax issue with a given state that'll remain unnamed, and I called a retailer that I knew in that state, and I said, um, your member of the legislature is pivotal to this tax debate. And he said, who is it? I never want to hear that again. Every retailer in the country needs to know who their member of the state legislature is. They need to know who their member of Congress is. And they reciprocally, that member needs to know who you are. It's, this is a great networking business. If there ever was a networking business, it's cigars. Use it to get to know each other. Find out who your state elected officials are, your city council elected officials are, and make them a part of your cigar network. Um, make sure they know who you are and that you know exactly who they are, because you never know when that relationship is going to come into play and be critical to the future of your business. So that's where these state associations are really raising the game at their level of political sophistication. I've watched it across the country since the infancy of the efforts in Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Virginia. And now it's spread across the country. Um, we can build a great political network for this industry that can serve it very well in every state capital, every city hall, as well as the halls of Congress.
And one thing I would say, I know that a lot of people are stretched thin right now in their stores and operating their business. And, advocacy is a time consuming, or can be a time consuming, thing and concern to worry about. If you, as the principal, as the PCA member, or as the retail business owner, don't have the time or the bandwidth to devote to advocacy, designate one of your employees, get them signed up on Cigar Action, have someone that is in your organization involved in advocacy, with PCA, with CRA, with the organizations that are out there fighting the fight day in and day out. So make advocacy a priority for the remainder of this year and going into next year. and we'll be a lot stronger. I think one of the things that's nice when we have such a trying campaign, and we had many trying campaigns over the past year in the states and both federally, it brings people together. It makes people pay attention. Now we can't lose that momentum. We can't lose that participation. We need to, maintain that. And a lot of it, in maintaining it, we're going to create those new resources that I referenced. And also, we'll be bringing them back in some fashion. Or a year and a half ago, we did roundtables with regional blocks. That's something that, you bet towards the end of this year and into 2022, we're going to bring those regional Zoom meetings. We want to see more participation, people that are hungry to get involved. That is a great time to give your opinion, your feedback, gripes, grievances, you name it. Ask questions, get involved. So we'll be bringing those back.
I think it all goes together to create a grand coalition and to continue this effort of truly making cigar consumers and retailers a bona fide political constituency. I always tell people, I've told people this for the last dozen years, finish every conversation with an elected official, whether you're asking them for an exemption from federal regulation, to asking them to oppose a state tax increase, to asking them to support a cigar bar bill, end every conversation with these words. I'm going to remember this on election day.
Yeah.
Tell it, it's not threatening. It's eloquent. It's, it's congeniality, but end every conversation with an elected official on something like this that means so much to you, your local small business, or your passion as a cigar consumer. I'm going to remember this on election day. And if enough of our, 2 to 3 million cigar consumers in this country and 2,000 retailers in this country start ending every conversation like that with an elected official, it's going to sink in that we matter on election day.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and one other thing, I know that we focused a lot on the states today. We are going to be doing another update on November 3rd on federal outreach. Patrick Anderson on our team will be joining me for that one, as well as Scott Pierce or John Anderson. We're going to get some other voices, or Greg Zimmerman, to talk about federal stuff and provide the latest information. As I mentioned before, continue to push that action alert. This is not over, but we did have a good development yesterday. Feel free to reach out to Glenn or myself about any of the issues that we discussed in this segment today, but definitely next week, tune in for the federal update and come with questions, comments, and concerns. And the other thing I will note, Glenn, you and I together, we definitely know how to talk. We're at 43 minutes. It was supposed to be 15 minutes, and usually when either Scott or I do it, it's about 15 minutes. So we definitely were a little bit wordy today.
Well, it's been great to be with you, and welcome back from the Dominican Republic. And again, Aaron has posted our contact information on this feed. Don't hesitate to call us or reach out to us with questions or needs. Let's all work together to make this a successful coming state legislative season in every state capital in the country.
Fantastic. Well, I see Orlando and Mike joined us. Thank you for joining us, as well as everybody else. Enjoy your Halloween. Hopefully you get to have some great cigars this weekend, and we'll see you all back next week for the federal update. Thank you.
Thank you.